Welcome, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure. And Mark's also a member of our Facebook group, which is, and so there's articles that he's put on there, and you're always welcome to tag him in or ask questions. But Mark, thank you very much again for so generously sharing your mind and ideas. Looking forward to the talk, and I'm going to pass on to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. Let's see if I can share my screen. I can. So here's my title. And I'm going to talk about the one main theme running through brain research. Well, actually running through research on dreaming, which culminates in brain research. There are many other themes that I'm not going to touch upon in my presentation, but I'm very happy to in the discussion to talk about other issues than the ones that I'm going to focus on in the talk. So I'm going to try to keep my talk not too long. It should be about an hour, and then we should have about half an hour for discussion. So here goes. The first large-scale attempt at a scientific study of dreaming was, of course, the work of Sigmund Freud more than 100 years ago. Freud's method was to listen to the reports of remembered dreams, and then to ask the dreamer to say everything that came into their minds in connection with each of the remembered elements of the dream. And Freud's finding, or at least so he claimed, was that if you do this in these associations, or through these associations, you become aware of an implicit story, that the explicit remembered dream, which he called the manifest dream, behind that there's an implicit mental process, which he called the latent dream. And he said that this implicit process made sense, that there was despite the nonsensical appearance of the explicit dream, the implicit dream had a sense. And he said that that sense was always of the same kind, namely that it was an attempt to fulfill a wish. So that was the beginning, the first major theory of a scientific kind as to what dreams are all about. On this basis, Freud formulated a model of what must be going on in dream processes, which became the foundation of his model of what goes on in mental processes in general. He says we perceive things, and from this we learn, we form memories, and these memories are consolidated iteratively, and eventually some of them become unconscious, cognitively unconscious. These cognitively unconscious intentions, Freud called them wishes. On the basis of experience, they're things that one wants to do, but they're cognitively unconscious, although they affectively conscious. In other words, they give rise to feelings, but one doesn't know where those feelings come from. So one wants to act on these intentions or wishes. That's through action, this motor system over here. But Freud said that there's what he called a pre-conscious system, what he later called the ego, which is governed by the reality principle, as opposed to the pleasure principle, which reigns in what he called the unconscious, or what he later called the id. And this prevents us from acting on these unconscious wishes. So that's the theory. So Freud says during sleep, this pre-conscious ego goes to sleep. Well, it doesn't go to sleep entirely. It goes to sleep for the most part. Any parent with a young baby in the house knows that you still are a little bit conscious, a little bit in touch with reality. But for the most part, you know, this part of the mind goes to sleep. And so then the unconscious, normally restrained by the pre-conscious ego, would have free access to motility. But this would result in us enacting these unconscious wishes, which are incompatible with the reality principle. And so Freud says access to motility is blocked during sleep, and thereby ensues a regressive process. So rather than acting on these wishes, we hallucinate ourselves. In the perceptual system, we hallucinate ourselves acting on those wishes. And so the crucial issue there is that this is how we stay asleep. If we could really act on those wishes, we would, our sleep would be disturbed. So to remain asleep, we, instead of really acting on them, we hallucinate ourselves as acting on them in the virtual reality of the dream. Remember, I said that the ego isn't completely asleep, and this adds an important wrinkle to Freud's theory, which is that if the sleeping ego were to see what we really want to do, these heartfelt unconscious wishes were to really be enacted even only in virtual reality, this would cause us anxiety. So Freud says the ego senses, it disguises and distorts these wishes. And that's why the remembered dream, the explicit or manifest dream, doesn't directly represent these attempts to fulfill our wishes, but only indirectly. And that's why you have to take these associations from the dreamer in order to reconstruct the implicit wish that lies behind the dream. So that's the Freudian story. Now, as I said already, that theory about dreams became the foundation of Freud's theory about how the mind as a whole functions. And that theory became very influential. It became very influential in psychiatry, perhaps particularly in American psychiatry in the first half of the 20th century. So much so that by the 1950s, it really was inconceivable that you could have a tenured professorship in psychiatry at a leading American university if you were not a psychoanalyst. It was considered a necessary qualification to be a senior academic psychiatrist those days. So that was where things stood around the middle of the 20th century. And then there was around that time, a philosopher of science named Karl Popper. Oh, I must see my screen is frozen. Let me just go on to the next slide. Karl Popper was working on ideas which culminated in this book, Conjectures and Refutations. And Karl Popper's, this book had an enormous influence on science. In fact, there's just about no natural scientist who does not follow the basic arguments that Popper formulated in this book. In this book, Popper said that this theory that I just summarized for you is not a scientific theory. This was Popper's philosophy was a philosophy of science, of what constitutes science. And he said, you know, we can all come up with theories, but not every theory is a scientific theory. What qualifies as a theory as being scientific is that it must be what he called falsifiable. In other words, the theory must give rise to predictions which can be tested in an experiment and either confirmed or disconfirmed. If it does not give rise to falsifiable predictions, then it's not a scientific theory. And Popper used Freud's theory as an example of something that looks like science but isn't science. In fact, he used the embarrassing word for it, pseudoscience. He said Freud's theory is a pseudo-scientific one. It looks scientific, but it's not really scientific. Why? Because it's not falsifiable. It doesn't give rise to falsifiable predictions. The theory that in order to protect our sleep, we hallucinate our wishes as being fulfilled in a disguised form, which therefore has to be interpreted. Popper pointed out that because of that interpretation requirement, you can't falsify the theory that behind the manifest dream, there's a latent wish. Because you could say, but look, my dream, the one that I had last night, didn't seem like I was fulfilling a wish. That falsifies your theory, Professor Freud. And Professor Freud would answer, no, but that's because it's disguised. Behind the disguise, I can infer a latent wish. And Popper's point, reasonable point, was that you can never, there's no dream that you can't interpret in that way as having a latent wish behind it. It's not falsifiable, and therefore, according to Popper, it's not science. Now, at roughly the same time, again, the middle of last century, a major breakthrough was made by two American physiologists, Azarinsky and Kleitman. And they used a thing called an EEG, an electroencephalogram, which places electrical leads on the outside of your scalp, and it measures the underlying activity of the brain. And they predicted that as you fall asleep, the frequency of the brain waves, the electrical activity in the brain, will become slower, and as measured by EEG. So that's what happened. This axis here measures the level of brain activity or brain arousal. This axis here measures time. And what they found, Azarinsky and Kleitman, was as you fall asleep, the rate, the frequency of the brain waves declines. So that confirmed their prediction. But then what happens after about 90 minutes is this they didn't predict, is that the brain activity increases. The brain becomes more aroused, and then it decreases again, and then increases again in roughly regular cycles, about 90 minutes apart. So this surprising finding, that the brain is paradoxically aroused during sleep, led these scientists to the not unreasonable hypothesis that perhaps this paradoxical physiological arousal that occurs during sleep is the basis of the paradoxical psychological arousal that occurs, namely that the unconsciousness of sleep is paradoxically punctuated by these conscious experiences called dreams. So that led to a prediction, again following Popperian requirements, that if you wake people up during this paradoxical brain arousal, which came to be known as REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, because the eyes dart about at that point, if you wake people up there, you'll get dream reports. And if you wake them up in non-REM sleep, then you will not get dream reports. This was a study done by Dement and Kleitman, again in the 1950s, and their prediction was confirmed. You get about 90% of awakenings from REM sleep elicit dream reports, and less than 10% of awakenings from non-REM sleep do. So that's a pretty good confirmation of the hypothesis that REM sleep is the physiological basis of dreaming. And from that point onwards, not to put too fine a point on it, REM sleep and dreaming were equated. REM sleep was seen as the objective physiological equivalent of the subjective psychological experience of dreaming. So this was big news, because now we had an objective physiological marker of when you're dreaming and when you're not dreaming. But much more important than that, because this is a physiological process, you can start to probe what its mechanism is. And that's what then happened. There was an attempt to find a race, to find what the brain basis is of REM sleep. Because if we can find the brain mechanism of REM sleep, we will have found the brain mechanism of dreaming. Importantly, it's not only human beings who have REM sleep. In fact, all mammals have REM sleep. And so that enabled the scientists concerned to use the standard method, which is to damage different parts of the brain, the standard method of that era, to damage different parts of the brain in order to see which part is critical for dreaming. That is to say, for REM sleep, dreaming now being equated with REM sleep. And so a scientist named Jouvet used cats whose brains are very similar to ours, and he made progressive slices. This is a human brain on the screen, but it's, as I say, very similar to a cat brain. And he made progressive slices through the cat brain, trying to see at what point does REM sleep stop. And to no doubt to his surprise, he was able to isolate the entire cortex, in fact, the entire forebrain, the organ of the mind. He was able to cut that off completely from the brain stem, this sort of automatic reflex part of the brain. He was able to, so making a cut here, thereby disconnecting all of that up there from this down here. He observed that despite doing that, disconnecting the entire organ of the mind from the brainstem, REM sleep persisted in these unfortunate cats. And he carried on cutting down and down. And it was only once he reached this level here, which is called the pons. This is called the pons. It was only at that point that REM sleep stopped. So that suggested that REM sleep was generated, and therefore dreams were generated at a very lowly level, at the level of the brain where only reflexes and basic physiological functions are regulated. Jouvet then passed the baton to his student Hobson, and Hobson worked out the details. And he found that there are a group of cells here in what's called the mesopontine tegmentum that fire very rapidly when you go into REM sleep. And that there are other cells over here in what's called the raphe and the locus ceruleus that fire, the firing goes down when you go into REM sleep. And then as you go out of REM sleep, the opposite happens. So these neurons switch to REM sleep on, and these neurons switch REM sleep off. That's basically what Hobson showed. The original discovery of REM sleep was in the 50s, mid-50s, and its equation with dreaming. By the mid-60s, Jouvet had found it's driven in the brainstem, and by the mid-70s, Hobson found what I just told you, that there's a simple switch on-off in a lowly part of the brainstem that has no mental functions whatsoever. And remember, the critical neurons are here, and they release a neurotransmitter into the forebrain, which is called acetylcholine. Don't worry about all these technical terms. The main thing is that these cholinergic neurons here arouse the forebrain, and they do it automatically every 90 minutes. So on this basis, Hobson formulated a theory which he called the activation synthesis theory. Activation synthesis. And the theory was very simple. He said the brain automatically auto-activates every 90 minutes over here, it activates the organ of the mind, the cortex, and the cortex then it's got this random activity going on, and rather than being activated by real experiences happening in the outside world, it's being activated by this random arousal process. And so he said it joins the dots. So, you have visual experiences here, and you have motor experiences here, and you have tactile experiences there, and you have thoughts over here, and you have fears over there, and so on. And you join them all together. You synthesize them into an experience. And to quote Hobson, he said, the cortex makes the best of a bad job. It tries to make some kind of episode out of this random activation. The crucial thing in Hobson's theory that you must note is that there's the causal process. What causes the dream, what causes the synthesis of all of these random neural firings is an automatic pre-programmed process, which Hobson took pains to emphasize was motivationally neutral. There's no motivation there. It's just, this thing just happens. And so there's no intrinsic motivation or wish, as Freud called it, in the dream. In fact, there's no meaning in the dream at all. Hobson said you can, of course, find meaning in it if you want to, after the fact. And he said it's a bit like looking at an ink blot. You can always say, oh, that ink blot reminds me of a butterfly, or this one reminds me of a bat. But that doesn't mean it actually represents a butterfly or a bat. It's a random blotch of ink into which you read meaning. You project the meaning into an intrinsically meaningless entity. So that was Hobson's view, this activation synthesis theory. That was his view of how dreams are generated. And he gave a talk. He published that paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry, and he gave a talk to the American Psychiatric Association in the 1970s, in which he espoused the theory I've just told you. And after the talk, a vote was taken as to whether Freud's theory is tenable in the light of these findings, and the vote went against Freud 2-1. Now remember, this is in America, where, as I told you, psychoanalysis had absolutely dominated American psychiatry. So this was a major event. 2-1, the vote went against Freud. So I've gone from the early days to the 50s to the 60s to the 70s. I came into the field in the 1980s. And this word synthesis, Hobson's idea that the forebrain, the cortex, synthesizes all of these random neural firings into a sort of a story. It's a little bit simplistic to say that what the forebrain does, what the cortex does, is synthesize. The different parts of the cortex do different things. So I was interested to see what would happen what would happen to the content of dreams when different parts of the cortex are damaged. And I predicted in good Popperian fashion, I said, well, this is the visual cortex. These patients can't see, so presumably they don't have visual dreams. This is the motor cortex. These patients are paralyzed on the opposite side of the damage to their brains. So presumably they're paralyzed in their dreams. And this is Broca's area, which produces language. These patients with damage here, they can't speak. Presumably they have non-verbal dreams and so on. That's what I was expecting to find. So now I'll show you a slide which summarizes what I did find. And I published these findings in the mid-1990s. The study took me 10 years because unlike Jouvet and Hobson and those people, I was not studying, because I was interested in the content of the dreams. I was not studying animals. I was studying human beings. And so I couldn't slice away bits of their brains like Jouvet did. I had to study patients with naturally occurring damage. And I needed to study large numbers of them. I studied 360 odd patients. And it takes time to collect data like that. So in the mid-1990s, I published my findings. And I'm not going to tell you everything I found. I'm going to tell you only a few things. The first was that patients with damage here in this brown area on either side of the brain, which is this area here, they stopped dreaming completely. And that's pretty consistent with Hobson's theory. If there's any part of the brain which synthesizes the different perceptual modalities, here's touch, here's hearing, here's vision, here's where they all sort of overlap. So the fact that you can't dream, if you can't form a multimodal mental image, which these patients have difficulty with, that's not surprising. Somewhat more surprising was another group of patients, which is marked in red over here. These patients also stopped dreaming. They had damage underneath the cortex here, deep inside the brain in this area, not on the surface, inside the white matter under here. And there was no obvious reason why patients, it has nothing to do with perception or memory. So, you know, it wasn't, or this sort of like synthesis thing that Hobson was talking about. But by far the most interesting finding was this one up here, this little blue area in the brainstem, which corresponds to this area here. These were patients who had damage in the part of the brain that generates REM sleep. You remember those cholinergic neurons in the pons that I mentioned. These patients reported preservation of dreaming. So although these ones over here stopped dreaming, as did these ones over here stop dreaming, they continued to have REM sleep. And these ones over here, they lost REM sleep, but they continued to have dreams. Now, that was, as I say, a big surprise. We call that in neuropsychology, we call that a double dissociation. It means if this part of the brain, when damaged, leads to a loss of REM sleep, but not to a loss of dreaming, and damage in this part of the brain leads to a loss of dreaming, but not to a loss of REM sleep, then that means that dreaming and REM sleep cannot be the same thing. There must be two separate things, and I hope it's obvious to you why that should be the case. So what I had discovered quite by chance was that dreaming and REM sleep are not the same thing. They happen at the same time, but they're not the same thing. And why was this missed? You know, for nearly 50 years. It's because they were studying animals. They were studying animals who can't speak. It was shown in all sorts of species, rats and cats principally, but all sorts of mammal species, that damage here leads to a loss of REM sleep. But what could not be observed was that it does not lead to a loss of dreaming. For that, you have to study human beings, and you have to take into account subjective reports, which was precisely what everyone was trying to get rid of in doing proper Popperian science. So there you see the cost of leaving out psychological data, experiential data about the contents, the phenomenology of dreaming. So this was a really surprising finding. I need to emphasize again what I'm saying. Dreaming and REM sleep are governed by two different brain mechanisms. So then my interest shifted to, well, what are the brain mechanisms that generate dreams as opposed to REM sleep? Now, I already told you that this part, or damage here, leads to a loss of dreaming. But that's not so interesting because it's kind of obvious why it should lead to a loss of dreaming, because this is where the actual heteromodal, in other words, visual and auditory and somatosensory, all of these different perceptual modalities come together in working memory, where we have this perceptual experience. Without that, you can't have a dream. You can't have mental imagery. You wouldn't be able to generate an hallucination. So that's not so interesting. It's obvious why these patients can't dream. But that's not true of these ones. It's not at all obvious why. So I was interested in what's going on here, because damage here, going back to that little slide, the red area here, damage there leads to a total cessation of dreaming. And so that whatever is going on in that part of the brain, this must be fundamental to what dreaming is all about. Because if just as dreaming is about hallucination, it requires those capacities that I mentioned earlier, that those perceptual ones, there's something else which it requires, which is going on here. And so the question was, what is that? Now, when I looked at the scans, in fact, here I've got a little facsimile of the scans of my patients who stopped dreaming due to damage there. When I looked at these scans, they reminded me of something, which is that the area of damage concerned is exactly where psychosurgeons used to deliberately produce damage in the brains of human patients for the treatment of schizophrenia and other psychoses. This was the notorious prefrontal leucotomy. It was called the orbital undercutting procedure of Freeman and Watts. And this procedure, the cutting of the white fibers under the cortex in this area, producing exactly that lesion, this was done with gay abandon in hundreds, in fact, in thousands of cases in the first half of the 20th century. So I went back to that old literature to see if they observed the psychosurgeons and the psychiatrists who worked with those patients all those years ago. That was during the dominance of psychoanalysis in American psychiatry. So I thought, well, presumably they asked their patients about their dreams, and they did. So I found in case reports a series of cases by an American psychiatrist named Jerome Frank, more than 500 cases. He observed that the psychological consequences of this operation were threefold. The one was that it stops positive psychotic symptoms. In other words, it stops hallucinations and delusions. The second was that it leads to a dramatic reduction in motivation. The patients become what's called adynamic. They lose all spontaneity, all initiative, all drive. And thirdly, they stop dreaming, just like my patients. So in fact, I hadn't discovered anything. It had already been, this thing had already been observed, decades before I rediscovered it. The damage here leads to a loss of dreaming. Now, I said Jerome Frank observed this in 500 cases, loss of dreaming with damage there. There was an English psychiatrist named Partridge. He observed the same thing in hundreds of cases. And there was a German psychiatrist named Schindler who observed the same thing, again, in hundreds of cases. And Schindler made an interesting observation. He said, if after the operation, the leucotomy, if after the operation the patient still dreams, if dreaming persists, then it's a bad prognostic sign, he said. And when I read that paper, I realized, gosh, that makes sense. Because if you can generate a dream, then you can generate an hallucination and a delusion. But that's what a dream is. It's an hallucinatory, it's a normal hallucinatory delusional state. And so if you can carry on dreaming after the operation, you can carry on hallucinating and being delusional. So that put me onto the path of, I remember I was trying to work out what brain mechanism here is so important. And that put me onto the path of this circuit. It goes by various names, but I'll tell you what it does in a minute. The important thing is that this circuit was severed by that operation, and the chemical that is emitted by this circuit is called dopamine. Remember, the one over here that drives REM sleep is called acetylcholine. Well, this one, which drives dreaming, is called the chemical is called dopamine for this circuit. So what put me on the track of this was that operation which severed this circuit was discontinued when we got drugs in the 50s called antipsychotics. Antipsychotic drugs were introduced in the 50s, and what do antipsychotics do? They still today, the main thing that antipsychotics do is they block dopamine. So I thought, well, then perhaps this is the chemical, the brain chemical that's so crucial for dreaming. Acetylcholine is crucial for REM sleep, but dopamine is crucial for dreaming. This must be must be the part of the damage that they made there, the many circuits that it severed. This must be the pivotal one, because this is the one that was pivotal to this ability to generate hallucinations and delusions, this dopamine circuit. Now, I told you I'll say what it does in a minute. It's called well, the technical name is it's the mesolimbic mesocortical dopamine system. But the functional name for it, it's being called the brain reward system. Or it's called the seeking system, or it's called the curiosity, interest, expectancy system. There are different people give it different names, but the common denominator behind all those names is that it's a positive motivational drive system. In fact, it is the major positive motivational drive system of the mammal brain. The fact that this circuit is severed in my patients was very interesting to me, because it seemed that this circuit, which is the most similar to what Freud had said drives dreams, this positive motivational wish or libidinal drive, as he also called it, there might after all be some merit to this. So then we need to test. Remember, that's just a theory. Now, it gives rise to falsifiable predictions. The first one is that if you give people dopamine, they'll have more dreams. And if you block dopamine, they'll have less dreams. And that's exactly what you find. My colleague Hartman did the first study. Giving people dopamine, it increases everything about dreams. It increases how many dreams they have, how long they are, how emotionally intense they are, how bizarre they are, how many nightmares they have. Everything about dreams is increased, not about REM sleep, about dreams. And my colleague Kelvin Kai-Ching Yu, blocked dopamine and found that it decreases all those same things that I just mentioned. Fewer dreams, shorter dreams, less emotionally intense dreams, less bizarre dreams, and next to no nightmares. So cutting that fiber pathway, it suggests that is the crucial one for dreams. Chemically manipulating that pathway suggests the same thing. Then my colleague Alan Brown did this study, positron emission tomography, where he imaged the dreaming brain to see which areas are activated and deactivated during dream and sleep. And it turns out that the most active, red means active, the red colors are increased, the blue colors are decreased activation. The most activated part of the brain when you're dreaming is exactly that same area that I was talking about. Here it is on another slice. Here it is again. That's this seeking system It's also called the wanting system. Berridge calls it the wanting system. Rawls calls it the reward system. Panksepp calls it the seeking system. It lights up like a Christmas tree during dreaming sleep. While I have this slide on the screen, I want to show you something else. What is deactivated during dreaming sleep is this area here, which is the prefrontal cortex. That's the closest thing to what Freud would have called the ego. It's the closest neurological equivalent. It's sort of like the realistic head office of the brain. And this part is the closest thing to what Freud would have called the id, or the libidinal drive part of the brain. So this really looks pretty much like what Freud said. The ego goes to sleep. The ego, the id doesn't. The id, these wishes, these libidinal drives persist. In fact, switch on big time. They're now disinhibited, and then rather than leading to action, they go back onto the perceptual systems. That's the other thing I wanted to show you. This is where, remember I told you there are 2 areas of brain damage that lead to loss of dreaming. The one is here, the other one is here. So this is that perceptual, those perceptual systems. So what Brown showed with this imaging study was almost identical to what I found with studying the consequences of brain damage. And then there were 2 further studies which really finally confirmed that this circuit that I showed you here, this wanting circuit or seeking circuit or reward circuit, that this is the driving mechanism of dreams, was these 2 studies. These colleagues showed that circuit, the neurons in that circuit fire at a maximal rate during dreaming sleep. They put electrodes into those cells and measured their firing. They fire at a maximal rate during dreaming sleep. And this study here, by these colleagues, they used a method called microdialysis, where they can measure the release of the chemicals, directly measure them at the terminals. And they showed by microdialysis that dopamine is maximally released in the brain during dreaming sleep. So brain damage studies, pharmacological studies, brain imaging studies, electrical measuring the neurals, the firing of the cells studies, and the measuring of the release of the neurotransmitters. All of them converged on the conclusion that this is indeed the circuit that drives dreams, as opposed to REM sleep. Panksepp, whose name I mentioned a moment ago, points out that you stimulate this pathway in an awake mammal, us included, it results in the most energized exploratory and search behaviors that we're capable of. And here's this thing about reward. It's a reward function. It's a pleasure generating circuit. So, you know, if you look at this, as I said, this looks pretty much like what you would have expected on the Freudian theory. At this time, I published my findings in the mid-90s, and by the early 2000s, I was invited to debate with Alan Hobson. Because I said to Alan Hobson, I think we owe Freud an apology, and he was outraged. And then he really hated Freud, Alan Hobson. And so we had, of course, scientific debates in the literature, but we were invited to this Congress, Neuroscience of Consciousness Congress, and we were invited to debate our views. This was a full 30 years after Hobson gave that famous lecture to the American Psychiatric Association, where that vote was taken. So after our debate, I said, well, this looks like what Freud said. And Hobson, of course, had plenty to say against that. But our colleagues had a chance to vote. And this time the vote, 30 years later, went in the opposite direction. So in 2007, the Assembly of Neuroscientists at this big conference said the Freudian dream theory is scientifically viable in light of these findings. So that's where things stood then. Now, I want to point out that what I've just said is that the findings of that study that I did and the studies that followed it, they suggest that Freud's theory was not wrong. They are compatible with it, but they're not directly testing the theory. My intention had not been to test Freud's theory. Rather, my intention had been to add details to Hobson's theory. I wanted to know what the cortex is doing in dreams, what the synthesis is all about. Let's break it up into smaller concepts than just synthesis. So it was quite by accident that I found, in fact, that's why I decided to train in psychoanalysis. I was very impressed that what we found by accident was very deeply compatible with the Freudian dream theory, despite everything. What's required, though, is a direct test of the theory. And remember, Popper had said it's not a scientific theory because it's not falsifiable. So that was before we had all these wonderful methods that I've just been talking to you about, all these studies that we used to confirm that that this wanting circuit or seeking or reward circuit is the circuit that drives dreaming. Those methods weren't available those days. So it may be that the theory wasn't falsifiable by Popper's standards using the psychoanalytic method. But now we have all these other methods. So I thought, well, let's use those methods to see if we can now scientifically test Freud's theory. So I remind you, Freud's theory is that fundamentally dreams, the function of dreams is to protect sleep, to protect sleep against these disinhibited libidinal wishes that they're disinhibited because the ego goes to sleep and then the id is released from inhibition, and these wishes, instead of being discharged in motor activity, that you have a regression, this regressive process onto the perceptual systems. And this is what the dream is. It's an hallucinatory, disguised hallucinatory fulfillment of the wish. So in light of these brain findings, and with the methods that we now have available, I came to the following idea. I said, well, if this is what drives the dream, this libidinal drive, this wish, this wanting, this seeking thing, and what normally we would act on those wishes, but we can't during sleep because the motor activity is blocked. By the way, we know physiologically too that it is blocked, and it really is blocked. There's complete motor paralysis below the neck during dream and sleep. It regresses onto the perceptual systems, and this is why patients with damage here can't dream. So my hypothesis was, my prediction was, if we take patients who've got damage here and therefore cannot dream, they've still got the motivational surge that occurs in the middle of sleep. So they must wake up. If the function of the dream is to protect sleep, in other words, this hallucinatory experience, this virtual enactment of your wishes, protects you from having to wake up in order to enact them in the real world, then patients with damage here who cannot have hallucinatory dreams, but still have this libidinal surge, they must wake up. Their sleep must be disturbed. If dreams protect sleep, and you can't have dreams, they protect sleep against these motivational surges, and you can't have dreams if you've got damage to the perceptual cortex, then the motivational surge should wake you up. Now, the crucial thing is, please note that is a falsifiable prediction. It's either going to be confirmed or it's not going to be confirmed. So I have so far only done a pilot study. I'm going to tell you the results of that pilot study. And then we are currently in Berlin, we're doing a big study to conclude this matter. This is because the study is not over. This is why I need to emphasize it's not a pseudoscientific theory. That's my main point. It is a theory which, even by Popper's criteria, can be falsified. I myself will certainly accept that dreams do not protect sleep if I find the damage here in the perceptual regions, which deprives you of the ability to generate a dream in the wake of this motivational surge. If those patients do not have worse sleep, then dreams are not protecting sleep. So that's the study. So I've taken stroke in the pilot study. I took 5 patients with strokes here who don't dream, and I took 10 patients with strokes here who do dream, and I compared their sleep architecture. And my prediction, I say again, is that the ones who don't dream will have worse quality of sleep than those who do dream. Everything else about these patients was the same. The only difference, they're the same kind of stroke, same area, etc., etc. The only difference was whether they dream or not. So this is there are various ways in which you can measure the quality of sleep physiologically, and so that's what I looked at. So here I'm going to quickly show you the findings, and then I see I've kept to my time commitments, and then there's plenty of time for us to discuss it. So this is, as I say, these are only pilot findings, but the results are so dramatic that I think it's worth reporting to you right now. So this is what's called a hypnogram. Remember, I showed you a cartoon of one over here. This is a cartoon of one. Remember, I said this is time, and this is brain arousal. Okay. So here's a real one. My first non-dreaming patient. Here's time, 8 hours of time, and here's brain arousal. And so what happened? For 2 hours, she didn't fall asleep. She eventually fell asleep, but then immediately woke up again. Then she had an hour of deep sleep and then just kept on waking up. She just could not stay asleep. And every time she goes into REM sleep, she wakes up. Goes into REM sleep, she wakes up. So this is really bad sleep. This is called sleep onset insomnia, means you can't fall asleep. Now, this is called sleep maintenance insomnia, means you can't stay asleep. This is like bad sleep. Here's the second of my non-dreaming patients. By the way, I should have said, it's only on the Freudian theory that you would expect that a non-dreaming patient would have worse sleep. I mean, the intuitive, the non-psychoanalytic view would be, if you don't dream, you'll have better sleep. So the counterintuitive, the psychoanalytic prediction is that sleep uninterrupted by dreams will in fact be worse sleep. So here's the second such patient, non-dreaming patient. She fell asleep reasonably. These were all women, by the way. Remember, I said I kept them all. I wanted them to be the same in every respect as to whether, apart from whether they dreamt or not. So everything about these patients was the same, apart from whether they dreamt or not. They're all very ill patients. I mean, they have just suffered strokes. Anyway, so this one did fall asleep, but then you see she just kept on waking up. She just could not stay asleep. So it's sleep maintenance insomnia. And she too, whenever she went into REM sleep, she woke up. And then here's the third one. This is the worst hypnogram I've seen in my life. I mean, I couldn't believe my eyes. Many people say, oh, I didn't sleep a wink last night, but you put them in a sleep lab, they actually sleep a hell of a lot more than they think they do. But this patient really just didn't sleep. For 4 hours, she stayed awake. Then she fell asleep briefly, and then again breathed. Look at this. I mean, for the most part, really, she just for the whole night practically, she was awake. I've never seen a worse hypnogram. And this is the fourth one. I rest my case now. There's another New York City skyline. This patient just terrible sleep maintenance insomnia. When she goes into REM, she wakes up. goes into REM, she wakes up, goes into REM, she wakes up, goes into REM, she wakes up. So that's what we found with these patients by comparison with the dreaming patients. And I'll now show you the comparisons. So my prediction was total sleep time. My prediction was that dreamers should have more total sleep time than non-dreamers. And that is what I found. Now, remember, these dreamers, they're not you and me. These are recent stroke victims. So, you know, they don't sleep brilliantly. They sleep 75% of the 8 hours that we put lights off. 8 hours later, we put lights on. During those 8 hours, the dreamers, the dreaming stroke patients, slept 75% of the time. But the non-dreamers slept 53% of the time. That's a whopping great difference, 22% difference. There's a thing we call a sleep efficiency index. I'm not going to go into the details of that. It's just an objective measure of the effectiveness of sleep. The dreamers scored 80 out of 100. The non-dreamers, on average, that is, the non-dreamers on average scored 61. Again, you know, nearly a 20-point difference. So huge difference by any standard. Then we predicted, or I predicted, that there would be more awakenings from sleep in non-dreamers than in dreamers, for reasons that I hope are obvious. So we measured an awakening index is the number of awakenings per hour. The dreamers, remember again, ill people, they woke up 3.5 times per hour. It's not good, but the non-dreamers woke up 12.5 times per hour. And there's a whopping great difference. That's why, as I said, even though this is a pilot study, I don't mind showing you the data. It's just so stark. Arousals are brief awakenings. So arousals per 1 minute arousals per hour. The dreamers have 18.9 per hour, and the non-dreamers 48.5 on average per hour. Again, just a gigantic difference. Here it's a huge difference. And these were all the things that we predicted. So each one of these predictions was confirmed. The same applies to what is called microarousals. Microarousals are physiologically you're awake, but it's so brief that you don't actually consciously wake up. And the dreamers had 15 microarousals per hour. The non-dreamers 39 microarousals per hour. So by every physiological measure, if you can't dream, you have bad sleep. So the hypothesis that dreams protect sleep, the very unlikely hypothesis arising from Freud's psychological study of dreams, is confirmed by this preliminary experiment, which, as I say, we're now doing on a larger scale in Berlin. So, you know, it really is quite remarkable that Freud, listening to patients giving their associations to their remembered dreams, intuited that behind this, there's this motivational process, you know, which disturbs sleep. And so this is why they have dreams, these hallucinatory experiences to protect sleep. It's quite remarkable that by that rough and ready method, he hit upon what certainly seems to be, in fact, we've never been able to, in neuroscience, demonstrate a biological function for dreams. And this certainly does seem to be a biological function of dreams, is that they protect sleep against that motivational surge that I told you, by means of a regression, a hallucinatory perceptual process. So that's what I wanted to tell you. I'm bang on time. And in case you didn't understand the gist of what I told you, I'll end by telling you this. I gave this talk in another venue a little while ago, and one of my colleagues brought her little daughter to the talk. I think her daughter was 4 or 5 years old, and she felt bad about having made her daughter sit through an hour's scientific lecture. And so afterwards, she said to her daughter, "Did you understand what that was all about?" And her daughter said, "Yes, she did." And so she did a little drawing to show her mum what my talk was about. And I'll show you her drawing. It was on the 11th of June, 2020. And she wrote, "Why do we dream? So we can have a good night's sleep." and there's the drawing. Okay, thanks for your attention. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Hi, Mark. Hi. I'm sorry. I've got my dog here. I hope she doesn't interrupt too much. She has a very strong seeking system, which was part of my question. And I'm aware I may be being a little bit greedy here, so do stop at whatever point, because I don't want to take up too much time. But Mark, you really have put dreaming back on the map. You've not only linked dreaming to the mesocortical, mesolimbic dopamine system, you've proved it. You've ticked the popper box. You've gone beyond. So, you know, tremendous work. It's back on the map now. What can we do with this important finding as psychotherapists or psychoanalysts? That's part one of my question. And my greedy add-on bit really is, my particular interest is in mentalization. I've trained as a mentalization-based therapist. And once you mentioned in one of your talks about how as human animal creatures, we're really quite opaque to ourselves. You know, we don't know why we do things sometimes. And it strikes me that maybe in understanding our dreams and our motivations and our wishes, this is something that can move us from being opaque to ourselves to maybe being a little bit more transparent, knowing our wishes and wants, and maybe in that dream theater, figuring out the wishes, wants, the thoughts, the minds of other people.
Well, so thank you, Andrew. You asked me what are the implications for practicing psychotherapists and psychoanalysts. I think the first implication, practical one, is that it gives, I should imagine, it gives a renewed confidence that, you know, when listening to a dream, that I'm not listening to random noise. You know, apart from 100 years of psychoanalysis, there's another science using different methods has come to the same conclusion that this is motivated, this is meaningful, that behind this is something like a wishful process. And so you listen in a different way. I think you listen in a different way, first of all, in the sense that, you know, you have renewed confidence, because there were actually quite a few psychoanalysts. For a moment, I thought I'd been muted. No, I wasn't. There were quite a few psychoanalysts in the wake of all of this Hobson stuff, you know, who did start losing confidence and saying, well, dreams are not anything special, and, you know, that sort of thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that our understanding of, you know, what Freud called it a libidinal drive, you know, so the seeking system, you know, to the extent that we understand it, we can understand a little bit in a little bit more precise a way what exactly is meant by that. I won't go into the details, but you know, there are new things we've learned about that drive. And then, in fact, my work on that system, my alighting on that system in my dream research made me interested in the other brains, these other arousal systems, all of which are responsible for emotions and for what Freud would have called drives. And you know, the study of all of them, I think, is of very great direct practical, what we've learned from the study of them is of direct practical relevance for psychotherapists. These are the basic emotional motivating forces at work. So we can understand better what Freud was intuiting when what he called libido. We can understand better what that is, but also we can understand better what all of these emotional motivational systems are. And you know, had I time, believe me, had I time, I would give you an hour or two's lecture on that. because you know, I have frequently spoken to psychotherapists about what we've learned about these emotional systems of the brain, and what the implications are for understanding psychopathology, which is ultimately emotional disorder. But I haven't got time to go into it. So that's my abbreviated answer to your abbreviated question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. It would be nice to go into it at some point, though, Mark. But I'm going to pass you on to Lucy. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, thank you, Mark. I have a question about, I think it's called sleep paralysis. I'm not sure. I have an 18-year-old at home at the moment who is sleeping every day because it's school holidays, and having these very vivid dreams where she's trying to wake up and can't, and is trying to talk to people and say she's awake and feels she's awake but can't get up, or can't open it, is dreaming that she can't open her eyes or can't talk. And I just wondered how that fit into this.
Yes. So I said in paradoxical sleep, as it was first called, it later became known as REM sleep, because during that phase of sleep you have rapid eye movements, REM. And I said it's not the only thing that happens. There are other things that happen simultaneously. One of them is that we dream. Remember, we do dream during REM sleep. It's just that it's not the mechanism that drives the REM sleep and the dreaming are two separate brain mechanisms. So you have rapid eye movements, you have dreams, in other words, hallucinatory experiences, and several other things, including motor paralysis. And each one of these has its own brain mechanism, but they happen together. They're kind of coordinated or orchestrated into this constellation, a physiological and psychological constellation that is generally known as REM sleep. Now, because each of them has their own mechanism, they can become decorrelated. They can become desynchronized, and this leads to what are called parasomnias. One of which you've just mentioned, which is this sleep paralysis persisting into wakefulness. So that one component of the REM phase, which should happen during sleep, the paralysis part, if it becomes decoupled from the other parts, so then you're no longer asleep, you're no longer you're not dreaming anymore, you're actually conscious, you're awake, but you're still paralyzed. That's a frightening experience. That's the opposite can also happen. The opposite is called REM behavior disorder, which is when the paralysis should happen and doesn't during dreaming, during REM sleep. And then the patient enacts their dreams, and they don't stay asleep for long for obvious reasons, because and it's very interesting when you look at what they do. Patients with REM behavior disorder, which is usually an early sign of Parkinson's disease. They act instinctually. They act usually, I'm afraid to say, aggressively. In fact, there have even been people who have killed their sleeping partners during REM sleep. But when we study the same thing in other animals, we find the same thing, that they like a cat will pounce during REM sleep, or it will stalk, or it will copulate. So all kinds of instinctual actions are enacted during, which is very interesting in relation to the theory of that the latent dream and the manifest dream are not the same thing, because the acting out of dreams results in these instinctual actions, whereas the manifest content of dreams is not so obviously instinctual activities. So I'm sorry, I'm slightly over answering. Yes, it's a sleep paralysis. It's one of the parasomnias. It's due to these things which normally happen together, getting out of sync with each other. And unlike REM behavior disorder, which, as I said, presages Parkinson's disease, the sleep paralysis that you're describing is entirely benign. It doesn't have any pathological implications, although it's horrible. sympathies with the youngster in your house who has that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of questions. So we're going to, next we've got Cheryl. How's it, Cheryl?
Yes. I'm still
Yes,
muted.
please go ahead,
Oh.
Cheryl.
Okay, good. Hi, I don't have so much a question as a report. I've had a lot of sleep disturbance, so I figured I would share it and let you make of it what you think is relevant to the group. Starts with a couple of head injuries that were never diagnosed that I suffered from bike accidents as a teenager. Immediately afterward, I had severe concussion that was never diagnosed, porthole vision, migraines, blurred vision, things like that. And then I began having both sleep paralysis and what I believe are nocturnal seizures that the sleep paralysis would lead up to. Then I had, in my later years, medical malpractice as part of sexual reassignment gone wrong, and severe PTSD from that, plus chronic pain that I medicated for many years as I worked my way out of a wheelchair with physical therapy. But horrible sleep, CPAP, auto servo ventilation to keep me breathing, severe edema, and just the worst night terrors you can imagine, where I would fall asleep and immediately launch into a night terror where I was dying over and over, or my kids were dying over and over. Eventually, I quit the narcotics and the seizure medications and just began drugging myself into a complete zombie state with as much indica and CBD cannabis as I could handle. That suppressed the night terrors, allowed me to sleep, and it suppressed the sleep paralysis and the seizures as well. And eventually, I got sick of being a zombie constantly because I was dosing all day and large dose before I went to sleep at night. And then I gradually withdrew from cannabis. And now I can sort of sleep almost normally. Sometimes it's still messed up. Sometimes it's hard to get to sleep. Sometimes I sleep a lot.
Right.
But it's not anywhere near as bad as it was.
You've invited me to, yeah.
Go ahead.
You've invited me to comment on, to make what I think is appropriate of what you've told us, and thank you for. And I'm sorry to hear about all of those troubles. I can only pick up on one or two of the things that you've said. One of them is there's a whole vast literature on the influence on dreams of different drugs. You spoke about a range of different drugs that you've taken at different times, and the effects for good and for ill on your dreams. There's a big literature on that, and I'll just mention one bit of that literature, which is very interesting, which is that I told you that if you give dopamine, dopamine agonists, and they also are recreational drugs, which are dopamine agonists, like amphetamine, methamphetamine, and cocaine. They're dopamine agonists. If you give dopamine agonists, you have more dreams, longer dreams, more vivid dreams, more emotionally intense, etc. The other, the chemical that drives REM sleep, acetylcholine. You would think that on Hobson's theory, that if you block acetylcholine, you should block dreams, and exactly the opposite happens. You have more dreams, and you have dreams during waking life. Anticholinergics lead to hallucinations in waking life. Antidepressants which boosts serotonin, which is the chemical that's increased in non-REM sleep, you would think that this should lead to less dreams. And again, it has the opposite effect. In fact, it leads to more dreams. So there's a very interesting literature about all of that. So that's one theme in what you're saying about the effects of different drugs on dreams. You know, it's a very important body of work that's been done on all of that. The other thing that you mentioned is seizures, this is a lot of work has been done on that too. Certainly nocturnal seizures, especially temporal lobe seizures, the seizures which don't lead to convulsions, but rather to anxiety states or deja vu states and so on. Those seizures, which happen frequently during sleep, they happen frequently during non-REM sleep. When you see the epileptiform activity on EEG, if you wake the patient up, they're reporting a nightmare. Nightmares are, you said you thought your nightmares were seizure equivalents. That is definitely the case in patients who have temporal lobe epilepsies. The seizure is experienced as a nightmare, and exactly as you said, a stereotype nightmare, the same content over and again, which again, by the way, suggests that it's not a random process. You know, that if you have the same dream triggered by a specific activation in a specific part of the brain with a particular affect, anxiety, you know, that says something. And if you, with anticonvulsants, you successfully treat the seizure disorder, the nightmares go away. And importantly, those nightmares happen in non-REM sleep, which shows that you can dream on the basis of arousal processes other than REM arousal. By the way, we think that dreaming occurs during REM because it's an arousal state. The dream keeps you asleep. And the last thing I'll say, because it's another theme that you raised, is about your insomnia, is that the remembering of dreams, the people who are good dreamers, as it were, you know, who remember a lot of dreams, unfortunately, it means that they have relatively bad sleep. The one thing that the simplest sort of thing that explains increased dreaming is increased arousal, increased interruption of sleep. That's well demonstrated. It was demonstrated in the 1970s already by Antrobus. So generally, you know, bad quality of sleep. I'm speaking about not the stroke patients that I was studying, where it's a different thing, where they actually have lost the capacity to dream and all of that. But in us regular folks, remembering lots of dreams, sleep disturbed by lots of dreams, means that you're having to dream to try to keep yourself asleep. It means there's something that's disturbing your sleep, and so it's a good predictor of poor quality of sleep. So those are just three things I'll pick up on what you've said. Thanks for sharing, Cheryl, and I'm sorry to hear about all of those troubles, but it sounded, if I understood you correctly, as if things are going better rather than worse. Thanks very much.
Yes, and thank you so much for your feedback, and also if you have anything to share about the use of cannabis for promoting sleep at some point, maybe in other documents, or please share the link for this conference also so we can share it with others.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, next we've got Aviva.
I can't hear Aviva. I don't know. I hope I'm not the only one.
Unmute.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me now? Hi.
Yes.
Hi, Mark.
Yes.
From somewhere in New York. I have a question for you that you didn't really go into, but I love the way you keep working to sort of find the commonalities between, what Freud said and everything we're finding in neuroscience. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts that you'd like to share about the kind of debate between whether the content of dream is really disguised content or quite transparent. There are many writers writing these days about the transparent nature and the metaphorical quality, and that it's not really disguised as much as a different language.
Yeah, thank you, Aviva. It's I think that it's a little bit like so much in science, I'm afraid, well, not only in science, in politics and other spheres too. People, we dichotomize, we turn things into binaries, which are not really binaries. There are, I mean, I'm sure just about everybody in this meeting will know that sometimes, you wake up from a dream and you know exactly what it's about. There's no mystery at all. It's just completely transparent. But there are other ones which, wow, that's bizarre. And, where the hell did that come from? And what on earth is that about? They're not so transparent. There's been the people you refer to who at least the ones I know about, which are the people in the, in the neuroscience, science of dreams sort of community. There's a thing called the continuity hypothesis, where they show that your current waking concerns, that they pop up in your dreams, that there's a continuity between your waking thought processes and your dream processes. And so that's one of the things which explains this transparency. It's you know what the dream is about. It's about that thing that you're worrying about, or that thing that you're anxious about, or that you that is on your mind. But as I say, there are other dreams where it really is not the case. And so it's not that dreams are always completely untransparent and they have to be decoded and you have to lie on Freud's couch, otherwise you've got no hope of ever understanding it. That sometimes applies and sometimes it doesn't apply. And I don't think that the fact that there's this continuum discredits the idea that there is some kind of distortion going on. However, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give too long an answer because I know there are many hands there. So what I'm going to say now is also too brief, but I hope it gives you the basic idea. I don't think that the only thing that distorts dreams is what Freud called censorship. I think that there are aspects of the formal process of the regression from abstract thought processes into concrete perceptual experiences, that by itself requires some kind of decoding, but it's not a censorship. So I think that a lot of what makes dreams untransparent is not censorship. But that doesn't mean that that censorship doesn't exist. I hope those few brief comments in response to your question do a little bit of justice to the importance of the topic that you raise and the complexity of it. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. Next we've got Shane, who's also a moderator on the group and is doing a talk next Sunday, which we look forward to, or this coming Sunday here. So Shane.
Shane, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm coming off it. Yeah, thank you. So just a quick technical question about your research. Now you're reporting that you're asking subjectively if people are having after stroke, if they're remembering their dreams when they wake up, correct?
Yes.
The one question I had, are you controlling
we wake them up from REM sleep. I mean, there are different methods that we use, but one of them is we wake them up from REM sleep. Another is that we have morning recall. There are various methods. But yes, it's a matter of, even if you wake somebody up from REM sleep, they're remembering a dream they had a few moments before. So yes, it's a remembered dream report.
My technical question was, how are you controlling for any working memory deficits in stroke patients?
Yeah,
because
sure.
If that is messed up, I don't know if you could recall the dream.
Yes. So remember I said that everything in the two groups of patients that we're studying in the study that I've talked about right at the end, that they all have the same type of stroke in the same area, and we match them on everything. We also match them on the level of their working memory performance.
Okay.
But more interesting than that is that the ones who don't dream, we also compare the two groups on what's called episodic memory, which is your ability to remember experiences. And on that too, they're the same. The two groups are the same.
Okay.
And then lastly, we ask them in the morning to give us a narrative account of everything that happened from the moment that they arrived at the sleep lab. And they say, well, you know, I arrived and you told me about this and that, and then you put all those things on my head, and then you switched the lights off, and then you woke me up in the middle of the night and you asked me whether I was dreaming, and I told you no, I wasn't. And, you know, so they're able to remember everything about the night.
Okay, good.
Don't remember any dreams. So this makes us confident that it's not a memory disorder. It is that they're actually not dreaming. The other
that was just a technical question that I had. Just want to make sure, because there's a lot of questions that people have about
I'll tell
recalling
you one last
dreams.
thing. I'll tell you one last thing, Shane, that is actually really, for me, settles the deal. Is that if your eyes are open, if you measure the EEG over the visual cortex,
the occipital,
when your eyes are open, in other words, when you process, have beta, and when your eyes are closed, you have alpha waves. So alpha activity means no visual information processing is going on. Beta means there is visual information processing going on. What we see in the EEG of these patients, when we compare the dreamers with the non-dreamers, is more alpha, much more alpha in the non-dreamers, which says no visual information processing.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. Okay, sorry to be so technical. I was just really interested.
No. I'm all for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate your
Good luck with your talk.
Thank you very much. Nice meeting you, Mark.
You too, Shane.
Okay, thanks. Well, Mark, we're sort of at the end. We could do one more. Let's see. Should we do one more with
yes, let's have a last one.
Jennifer.
Okay.
There we go.
Jennifer, you're muted.
All right, how about now?
Good.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. I'll try to be very brief. Lawyer turned social worker. So daughter up in the corner here, she's 22 now. In fourth grade, I read about Freud and Jung, and then I happened to also check out a book about lucid dreaming. I like to experiment. So when I started, I'm 50 now, when I was 4, and I'll get to my premise here for therapy, hopefully regarding children, and maybe depressed adults as well. So to escape my abusive childhood, I learned the techniques for the lucid dreaming, which you're aware of, journaling, key things to key myself into when I was dreaming, certain things I would see or feel in the dream, then I identify it's a dream and then I can take over. So I used that, and then in turn taught my daughter those techniques, and now she works for the federal government. She's very successful. I'm wondering, could we, since I used that as an escape mechanism, like I couldn't control what was going on in the outside world, but when I was asleep, once I conquered lucid dreaming, which I do very well now, because obviously I've been practicing for 46 years. No, I'm sorry, about 40 some years. I'm wondering if we could use that, or maybe it would have an application in therapy for traumatically abused children or adults, in that if we could teach them to lucid dream, that would be the one time as social workers, we learn a lot of kids and adults are frustrated they can't control their outside environment. But if we could give them this downtime while they're asleep, where they can use the lucid dreaming, like I do, to process and to feel in control of something, could that possibly boost their self-confidence when they wake up? And then, do you know what I mean? Like, let it be a coping mechanism, though, even for depressed people. They can't control what's going on while they're depressed. So if we teach them the lucid dreaming techniques, and they can have a little bit of control or a little bit of happiness while they're dreaming, could that be kind of a co-helping with therapy? And just a side question off of that, and then I'll shut my mouth because I'm wordy. I'm off today, so excuse the hair and the dog. When you said it's assumed that the dreaming is during the REM part, and because of it's the stimulation, so we're assuming that the stimulation is the dreaming. is it possible that the REM stage is the proverbial swim to the surface from the dreaming? In other words, our body, our mind says enough, and it swims to the surface, stimulates itself to pause the dream for a little bit and give ourselves a break, kind of like when you're running, like I like to run, you stop because you're out of breath. So could the period between when what we identify as REM, rapid eye movement, I know we associate with the movement that we're looking in the dream, but could it be more that we're trying to escape from that and give ourselves a breather? But anyway, I know that's a two-part question, and I'm sure it's
Yes.
way off, and I'm sorry, but thank you.
No. So let me answer the two questions. I'll answer them in reverse. The relationship between REM sleep and dreaming. We have, if you wake somebody up from REM sleep, there's a 90% chance that they'll give a dream report. From non-REM sleep, about a 10% chance. However, you must remember that non-REM sleep, we have 3 or 4 times more non-REM sleep than we have REM sleep. So if you measure the very same thing in a different way, you say, if you take all the dreams you have during the night, how many of them are in REM? 25% are in non-REM sleep. So there are a lot of dreams that happen outside of REM. If you take the first phase of non-REM sleep, which is as you're falling asleep, it's called a sleep onset or descending stage 2. You wake people up at that point, you get a 50% chance of a dream report, and they're still 90 minutes away from their first REM period. So although there's a correlation, statistical correlation between dreaming and REM sleep, it's the two things are by no means the same thing. And so I don't think that anything about the mechanism of REM sleep is except for the fact that it's an arousal state. It's one of the many things that arouse us during sleep. Like as you're falling asleep, you're still relatively aroused. That's why you have 50% of the time you have dreams. In the late morning, when cortisol levels rise, you also get more and more dreams during non-REM sleep. So there are all sorts of different physiological backgrounds for dreaming. There's nothing specific about REM sleep. It's just a statistical correlation. The thing about lucid dreaming, the most interesting thing that we've learned about lucid dreaming, I don't know if I emphasized enough in my talk that when you go to sleep, that this part of the brain, which is called the dorsolateral prefrontal convexity, it's really like, I said it's like the head office. If there's any part of the brain which is Freud's ego, it's that. That really deactivates dramatically as you're falling asleep. And during REM sleep, it's deactivated dramatically. While those emotional circuits are so highly activated, these frontal self-regulatory systems are deactivated, except in lucid dreamers. So in lucid dreaming, the frontal cortex stays activated, and so you continue to be master of your own mental house.
Yeah, I'm all over. It's been so helpful in life, and for my daughter, and for the youth that I've been teaching this when they've been through traumatic. It takes many months.
In people who've been traumatized, I think that dreaming can be quite traumatic because all of the emotional spooks come out, and also you've got no control over what happens in dreams. This is unlike waking life. I mean, dreams are perhaps when we are least, not lucid dreamers, the rest of us, we are least in control of what's happening, even less than in
but if we can teach the lucid dreamers, then
so
they take control.
That's why I'm saying, I'm agreeing with you that I can see why it would feel therapeutic or reassuring, especially to people who've been traumatized, to be able to control. But I'll tell you one last thing, and then we must end.
Thank you so much.
Is that I think that one also wants more than that, though. You don't only want to be able to control your inner world while you're sleeping through lucid dreaming. You also need more than that in order. I mean, not you personally. I'm saying we need more than that. We need it in the rest of life outside of dreaming too. And so there might be a helpful tool, as it has been for you, but I would just say that one also needs to do more than that in order to
Oh,
get.
lovely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
you all. Thanks, Mike Ben, for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you very much.